Emma's back hit the bedroom wall with a soft thud. Her breath came in quick, shallow bursts, the sound of it almost drowned out by the low, steady hum of rain against the window. Daniel's body was pressed against hers, firm and unyielding, his hands gripping her hips like he'd been starving for the feel of her. She was shaking, not from fear, but from the shock of him, the truth of him. He wasn't supposed to be like this. Her father had looked her straight in the eye and told her Daniel Carter was barely a man anymore, that the accident had left him weak, damaged, incapable of this. And yet, Daniel's mouth brushed her ear, his breath hot against her skin. "You still think I'm the man you thought you married?" Her lips parted, but no words came. Her mind was still trying to catch up with her body, which was already melting into his touch. Every kiss he left down her neck was like a brand, marking her. Every slow, deliberate press of his body told her he wasn't just capable, he was dangerous. And God help her, she didn't know if she wanted him to stop. Hello, I'm Ethan, your storyteller. Please subscribe, like, and comment to see more of our videos. Thanks. Now let's begin. Emma Brooks loved her freedom. She loved waking up in her tiny city apartment to the smell of fresh coffee, working late into the night on her fashion store, and eating cereal for dinner when she didn't feel like cooking. She had friends who teased her for refusing to settle down, but Emma knew exactly what she wanted from life, and it didn't involve a husband she didn't choose. That's why, when her father, Michael Brooks, showed up unannounced one Tuesday afternoon, she immediately knew something was wrong. He didn't sit. He stood in her living room like a man about to deliver a verdict. "Emma," he said, his voice clipped, "you're marrying Daniel Carter." She blinked, her coffee mug halfway to her lips. "I'm sorry, I thought you said marrying." "You meant meeting, right?" "No, marrying. The wedding will be in a month." Her laugh was disbelieving. "Dad, you've officially lost your mind. I don't even know him. You've met him before. Years ago, at the Carter's summer gala. Dad, I was 16. I barely remember what he looks like. And isn't he," she lowered her voice, "in a wheelchair after that car accident?" Michael's jaw tightened. "Yes, and he's still a good man. His father and I have been friends for decades. This is an opportunity for both our families." Emma set her mug down hard. "An opportunity? You're talking about my life, not a business merger. You're being dramatic. He's wealthy, he's respectable, and he'll take care of you. I don't need him to take care of me. I can take care of myself." Her father's tone sharpened. "Emma, you run a small online store that I funded. If I pull my support, you'll lose it." The words landed like a slap. "You wouldn't. I would. And I will, if you don't agree to this marriage." The next 2 weeks were war. Shouting matches. Doors slammed hard enough to rattle picture frames. Sleepless nights where Emma lay awake, wondering how her father could value a business deal over her happiness. She even thought about running away, until she realized her father had the legal power to freeze her accounts. The final straw came at the engagement dinner. Her father made a speech about family unity and honoring old friendships, while Daniel sat across from her, silent and unreadable, his wheelchair positioned slightly back from the table like he wasn't part of the celebration. When they shook hands afterward, his grip was firm, his eyes steady on hers. There was no smile, no warmth, just a quiet intensity she couldn't read. And for some reason, that unsettled her more than his silence. It was the kind of wedding people posted about for weeks. Glittering chandeliers, a string quartet, and a guest list full of people who spoke in measured tones and sipped champagne like it was liquid gold. Emma wore a custom silk gown, her hair styled in loose curls that framed her face. She smiled for the cameras, for the guests, for her father's reputation. Daniel was devastatingly handsome in a tailored black suit, his dark hair perfectly combed, his blue eyes unreadable. He didn't reach for her hand during the vows. When the priest said, "You may kiss the bride," he leaned forward, brushed her cheek with the lightest touch of his lips, and leaned back again. For the rest of the evening, they played their roles, the perfect couple, and yet the space between them felt like miles. Emma had thought her new home would feel like stepping into a dream. It was beautiful, breathtaking, even the kind of place you saw in glossy magazines. Glass walls that caught the morning sun, a staircase that spiraled up like something out of a movie, gardens so perfectly trimmed they looked unreal. And yet, the first word that came to mind when she walked through the front door was cold. The feeling settled deeper the next morning. She woke alone in a bed that was far too big for one person, her side untouched. Sunlight filtered through the white curtains, dust motes dancing in the air. And for a moment, she let herself imagine she was just on a holiday in some luxury villa. But then she remembered this was her life now, her marriage. When she stepped into the dining room, she found Daniel already there. He sat at the far end of the long table, dressed in a crisp white shirt, a tablet in front of him, and a silver teapot to his right. His wheelchair was angled just enough to suggest this was his place, his routine. "Good morning," she said, trying to sound natural. He looked up briefly, his blue eyes cool, but not unkind. "Morning." That was it. No smile, no warmth. Just that one word before his attention returned to the screen. Emma took a seat 3 chairs down, poured herself some coffee, and let the silence stretch. The faint clink of her spoon against porcelain sounded almost intrusive in the vast room. "How did you sleep?" she asked after a moment, forcing the words out just to fill the air. "Fine," he said, without looking up. "You?" "Fine." They went back to eating, the conversation dying as quickly as it had begun. This became the rhythm of their mornings. She would wake alone, dress, and find him already at the table. He never lingered after breakfast. Instead, he wheeled himself away to his study, where the door would remain closed until noon. After that, he would disappear into the East Wing, the part of the house she hadn't been invited to explore. The West Wing was hers. Her bedroom, her little sitting area, and the sunroom where she often worked on her laptop. The housekeeper, Clara, kept the rooms immaculate, her presence as quiet and efficient as the rest of the staff. On the third day, Emma had tried to push past the invisible wall between her and Daniel. "Do you like movies?" she asked at dinner, her fork paused midair. Daniel glanced up, as if surprised she'd spoken. "Some. Would you want to watch one together sometime?" she offered, keeping her tone light. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he cut into his steak, chewed, swallowed, and said, "I'm usually busy in the evenings." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Right, of course." Another time, she tried suggesting they go out into the city together. "There's a cafe I think you'd like. Their pastries are incredible." He tilted his head slightly, studying her. "You don't even know what I like, Emma." She met his gaze. "Then maybe you should let me find out." Something flickered in his expression. Amusement? But it vanished too quickly to be sure. "Maybe," he said, and returned to his meal. That was the closest she'd gotten to a yes. Nights were lonelier still. She would sometimes walk past the East Wing and wonder what was behind that heavy oak door. When she'd once asked Clara, the woman's polite smile had faltered just enough for Emma to notice. "That's Mr. Carter's private space, ma'am," Clara had said softly, before changing the subject. Private space. The words echoed in her mind more than they should have. Still, Emma adapted. She learned to fill her days with quiet things. Reading in the sunroom, tending to the little patch of flowers outside her window, sketching designs for her store. Every so often, she would catch Daniel watching her when he thought she wouldn't notice. Once in the dining room mirror. Another time, as he passed her in the hall, his gaze lingering on her bare legs folded beneath her on the sofa. He never said anything, and neither did she. It wasn't a marriage, not really. It was coexistence, polite, careful, and balanced on something she couldn't quite name. But beneath it, she could feel something else forming. Curiosity, frustration, and the uneasy sense that this stillness between them wouldn't last forever. The rain had started just after midnight. Emma lay in bed, watching droplets race down the glass balcony doors, the soft patter on the roof filling the silence of her wing. She tried reading, then scrolling through her phone, but nothing seemed to quiet the restless hum under her skin. She thought about the East Wing again. That door, the one she had never been invited through. Her mind told her to leave it alone. Her heart told her to move. She slipped out of bed, wrapping a cardigan over her nightdress, and padded barefoot into the hall. The marble floor was cool against her skin, the air heavy with the scent of rain drifting in from the garden. The west wing faded behind her, replaced by the deeper shadows of the main corridor. The east wing door was closed, as always. But tonight, it wasn't locked. Her fingers hesitated on the brass handle before pressing down. The hinge gave a soft groan, the kind that made you glance over your shoulder even when you were alone. Beyond it was a narrow passage lined with photographs. Daniel in a sharp suit, standing with dignitaries, shaking hands with people she didn't recognize. In all of them, he was seated in his wheelchair. But as she moved deeper, she heard something. A low, rhythmic sound. Metal against metal. The faint hiss of breath. She followed it, her pulse climbing. And then she saw him. Daniel. Standing. Not just standing, moving. His body glistened with sweat under the low industrial lights of the private gym. His back was to her, muscles shifting under his shirt as he pulled a barbell from the rack. He moved with a power that contradicted every assumption she'd made since the wedding. Emma's mouth went dry. Daniel? He froze. The weight hit the floor with a dull thud. Slowly, he turned his head, his chest rising and falling, his eyes locking onto hers. The calm, distant man she'd married was gone. In his place stood someone sharper, dangerous, alive. "What are you doing here?" His voice was low, controlled, but there was an edge to it. Her throat felt tight. I heard something. I didn't mean to." She swallowed hard. "You can walk." A muscle ticked in his jaw. "I could do a lot of things you don't know about." She took a step forward without thinking, her bare feet soundless on the rubber mat. "Why would you let me think? Why pretend?" "Because it's easier that way." His tone cut through the air, but his gaze didn't waver. "People see a chair. They make assumptions. I let them. It keeps them out of my business." Her mind raced, trying to reconcile the cold, polite man at the breakfast table with this presence in front of her. "But I'm not people," she said softly. His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Aren't you?" She didn't answer. Couldn't. Because in that moment, the air between them changed, thickened. The kind of tension that made her aware of every inch of her own skin. Daniel stepped toward her, each movement deliberate, predatory. He stopped just close enough for her to feel the heat radiating from his body. "You shouldn't be here, Emma," he said quietly, almost like a warning. "Unless you're ready to find out exactly who you married." Her heart hammered, and she realized she wasn't sure if she wanted to run or stay. Emma's pulse was a storm. Every instinct told her she'd just stepped over a line she couldn't uncross. That whatever lived behind this man's carefully built facade was dangerous, volatile, and something else she couldn't name. Daniel didn't move closer, but he didn't back away either. He simply looked at her. It was worse than if he'd shouted. Those blue eyes, colder than glass most mornings, now burned with something raw, something that made her skin prickle. "You've been lying to me," she said, her voice steady in spite of the way her chest was rising and falling. "I never told you I couldn't walk." His words were quiet, measured. "You assumed, like everyone else. That's not fair." She crossed her arms, more to keep her hands from shaking than to seem defensive. "You've let me believe exactly what I wanted you to believe." He cut in, his tone dark but not angry. "It's called control, Emma. You should try it sometime." Her breath hitched, partly from the sharpness of his words, partly because she could see the way his shoulders moved under that damp shirt, the way his forearms flexed when his hands curled slightly at his sides. "This is a marriage," she said, fighting to keep her voice from cracking. "A partnership. I should know the truth about the man I'm living with." He arched a brow, sharing polite breakfasts with, passing like strangers in hallways. His mouth twitched into a humorless half-smile. "Tell me, Emma, what do you really know about me?" The words lodged somewhere deep because she realized she didn't. Not beyond the headlines, the rumors, and the version of him he allowed her to see. "I know you're arrogant," she said, stepping toward him now without realizing it. "I know you like control, and you hide behind that damn chair because it's easier than letting people close. Careful." The warning in his voice was soft, but it rolled through her like thunder. "No," she said, surprising herself with the force in her own tone. "You've kept me at arm's length since the moment I stepped into that house. And now I find you here at midnight like," she gestured at him, at his body at the weight rack behind him. Like this. His gaze swept over her. Not just her face, but the loose fall of her cardigan, the hem of her nightdress brushing her thighs, the bare skin of her feet against the mat. "And how does it make you feel?" he asked, his voice almost low enough to be a whisper. She opened her mouth, but no answer came, because the truth, the messy, impossible truth, was that it made her feel everything at once. Shocked, betrayed, curious, drawn, too drawn. "Do you want to know who I really am, Emma?" he said, his head tilting slightly, his tone shifting from challenge to something almost dangerous. She swallowed, the rain outside as softest in the background. Yes, that one word seemed to change him. He stepped closer, one slow, deliberate step, then another, until the faint heat of his breath touched her cheek. He didn't touch her, but it was as if the air itself had narrowed between them. "You think you do?" he murmured, his voice like velvet over steel. "But knowing comes with a price." Her heartbeat was so loud, she was sure he could hear it. "Then maybe I'm willing to pay it." His eyes held hers for a long, unreadable moment, and then, finally, his mouth curved into a slow, dangerous smile. "We'll see." He stepped back, the loss of his proximity almost physical. Without another word, he reached for a towel, slung it over his shoulder, and walked, past her, out of the gym, leaving her standing there with her pulse still running wild. Emma stayed in the doorway for what felt like minutes, the smell of rain and sweat in the air, her mind turning over the same thought again and again. She hadn't just discovered his secret. She'd just woken something neither of them could put back to sleep. Emma woke the next morning to the sound of rain still tapping against the windows. For a moment, she thought she'd dreamed it. The gym, Daniel standing, the heat in his voice. But when she walked into the dining room, he was already there. As always. Except, not as always. His hair was damp, his shirt open at the collar, and the wheelchair was gone. He stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching the street below as if the world outside interested him more than she ever could. Her footsteps made him glance over his shoulder. "Morning," he said, voice calm, like nothing had happened. She poured herself coffee without sitting down. "You're up early." "I'm always up early. But not like this." She gestured toward him, her eyes narrowing. He smirked faintly, turning back to the glass. "Maybe you're just paying more attention now." The remark landed somewhere between a taunt and an invitation. She didn't rise to it. Instead, she took her coffee to the far end of the table and sat, watching him as he moved, each step deliberate, almost silent. The rest of breakfast passed in a strange quiet. Not the old, polite silence they'd lived in for weeks, but something waited. Every time she looked up, she caught him already watching her, like he was measuring something. Over the next few days, their paths seemed to cross more often, and not by accident. In the kitchen, he brushed past her to reach a cupboard, the barest graze of his arm against her back lingering longer than it should. In the hallway, he stopped close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, his gaze dropping briefly to her mouth before he moved on. Once, she came home to find him in the library, sleeves rolled to his forearms, rearranging a shelf. He didn't look up when she entered, but his voice found her anyway. "Curiosity is dangerous, Emma." She leaned against the doorway. "Only if there's something worth finding." He set a book back in place with a soft thud, finally turning toward her. "Maybe there is." Nights became the hardest. She'd lie in bed, staring at the dark ceiling, replaying the moment in the gym over and over. His voice, his proximity, the unshakable feeling that he'd been waiting for her to stumble into his world. And yet, he didn't come to her. Not directly. Instead, he left breadcrumbs, a brief touch, a look that lasted too long, a single line spoken low enough to echo in her head hours later. Emma wasn't sure which was worse, the distance between them before, or the pull between them now. The rain had been steady all evening, soft at first, then turning heavier, each drop drumming against the kitchen windows. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that made every sound feel too loud. She padded in barefoot, the tiles cool beneath her feet, the faint hum of the refrigerator the only background noise. She wasn't expecting him to be there, but there he was, leaning casually against the counter, a glass of water in hand. The light above the stove cast him in half shadow, gold catching on the sharp line of his jaw, the broad slope of his shoulders. He didn't move when she entered, only let his gaze follow her like he'd been waiting for this exact moment. Couldn't sleep. His voice was low, almost swallowed by the sound of rain. She shook her head, reaching for a mug in the cupboard. You? A faint smile ghosted over his lips. Didn't even try. The silence stretched again, not awkward but heavy. The air seemed thicker here, warmer, the faint scent of his cologne curling into her senses. She opened the cupboard for tea, but her fingers felt clumsy, fumbling the packet. He stepped forward. Just one step, but it was enough to close most of the space between them. The counter was behind her, and she could feel the subtle charge in the air as his presence filled it. You're shaking, he murmured. Her breath hitched. It's cold. It wasn't. His hand came up slowly, deliberately, brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek. His fingers lingered, not long enough to be blatant, but far too long to be innocent. The kettle began to hiss, steam curling into the air, but neither of them moved. She looked up at him then, really looked, and in that charged, fragile moment, the storm outside felt like a reflection of what had been building between them for days, maybe weeks. He didn't kiss her. Not yet. But the way his thumb traced the corner of her jaw told her he wanted to. And the way she didn't step back told him she wanted it too. The kettle clicked off, a small, sharp sound that seemed out of place in the moment. Neither of them moved to pour the water. Daniel's gaze held hers, steady, unblinking, the kind of look that felt like it stripped away every defense she'd built since stepping into this house. Emma, his voice was low but not hesitant, more like a warning, or a promise. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. Yes. For a moment, he didn't answer. His hand lowered from her jaw, but only to rest against the counter beside her hip, close enough that his knuckles brushed the fabric of her nightdress. The move trapped her without force. His body angled just enough to block the world beyond this narrow stretch of counter. You keep standing this close, he murmured, and something's going to happen. She swallowed, her throat dry despite the steam thickening the air. Maybe I'm not the only one standing close. A faint flicker of something passed over his face. Amusement, desire, restraint, before his hand found hers on the counter. He didn't lace their fingers together, just let his palm cover hers, warm and solid. The storm outside swelled, a gust of wind rattling the kitchen window. She didn't know if it was the thunder that made her heart jolt or the way he leaned in, the scent of him drowning out the faint herbal edge of the tea she'd never made. His lips brushed her temple, light, almost accidental, but lingered for the span of a breath before trailing down toward her cheek. She turned her head just enough that the next place they would meet was her mouth. And that was it, the moment the line vanished. The kiss wasn't rushed. It wasn't careful either. It was the quiet, certain claiming of something they had both been circling for far too long. His hand left hers to rest at her waist, fingers curling against the thin cotton of her dress, drawing her closer until she could feel the heat of him through every inch where they touched. When he finally pulled back, it was only by a fraction, his breath warm against her lips. You don't get to take that back, he said. She didn't want to. Emma woke before the alarm, though she didn't remember setting one. The rain had stopped sometime during the night, leaving the air heavy and still, the kind of stillness that made every sound feel amplified. She lay there for a moment, staring at the pale ceiling, replaying the kitchen in her mind, the heat of his hand on hers, the press of his mouth, the quiet command in his voice that wasn't quite a threat, but wasn't safe either. Her fingers brushed her lips before she even realized what she was doing. She slipped on a soft cashmere sweater over her nightdress and padded down the hallway, the marble floor cool beneath her bare feet. He was already there. Of course he was. Daniel stood at the stove, sleeves rolled back, the clean, controlled movements of someone who wasn't just making breakfast. He was executing it. His hair was damp from a shower, and the faint scent of expensive cologne mixed with the aroma of butter and coffee. "Morning," he said without looking at her, voice even clipped. "Morning." She leaned against the counter, arms loosely crossed. "I didn't think you cooked." "I don't. Often." His eyes flicked her briefly, unreadable. But you were asleep. I'll let you have the time. Her pulse kicked at that. The way he said it made it sound less like a kindness and more like he'd decided it for her. They didn't talk about the kiss. Not directly. Instead, breakfast unfolded in silence, broken only by the muted clink of cutlery. He set a plate in front of her, his fingers brushing hers, deliberate, she thought, but fleeting enough to deny if he wanted to. Halfway through, he leaned back in his chair, coffee in hand, studying her like a piece he was deciding whether to move on the board. "You've got questions," he said finally. She lifted her gaze. "About last night? About me." His mouth curved slightly, but it wasn't a smile. "And maybe about what happens next." Her fork stilled. "I think I already know what happens next." He tilted his head, assessing her like she'd just made a bold play. "Careful, Emma. Making assumptions in my world can be expensive." "And in your world," she said slowly, "what am I exactly?" He didn't hesitate. "Mine." The word landed between them like a declaration and a warning. She didn't argue. Not because she agreed, but because she wasn't sure what would happen if she said anything at all. The days that followed were unlike anything Emma had known. Daniel didn't smother her, but he didn't leave her untouched either. His presence was everywhere, in the way the driver was always waiting without her asking, in the subtle rerouting of her day, so their paths crossed at just the right moments, in the private dinners that felt like accidents, but never were. She discovered he worked in silence, not the kind born of detachment, but a focus so sharp it drew the room into stillness. He'd be in his study, sleeves rolled up, scrolling through contracts on one of his 3 monitors while speaking low into a headset. Sometimes, when she passed by with coffee, he'd pause mid-sentence just long enough to take the cup from her, his fingers brushing hers in a way that made her lose her own train of thought. Their conversations were shifting. The silences between them weren't awkward anymore. They were weighted. One evening, they ended up on the balcony after dinner. The city stretched beneath them in a glittering sprawl, the air cool and scented faintly with rain from earlier. Daniel was leaning against the railing, wine glass in hand, his shirt open at the collar. "You're quiet tonight," he said, eyes still on the skyline. "Maybe I'm thinking." "Dangerous habit." She smiled faintly. "You seem to do it a lot." "I have to. My decisions affect everything." He turned to her then, studying her. "You're not used to being part of that world." "No," she admitted, "but I'm learning." Something flickered in his expression. Not approval exactly, but something close. He set his glass down, stepped toward her. "You're not afraid of me," he said quietly. She met his gaze. "Should I be?" He stopped a breath away, his hand lifting. Not to touch, not yet, but hovering close enough she could feel the heat radiating off his skin. "Not unless you're afraid of what happens next." It was the first time she didn't look away. From that night, something shifted. They didn't rush into each other's arms. It was slower, more deliberate. A passing of a file across his desk, with fingers lingering too long. A shared breakfast where they sat closer than necessary. A late-night chess game where her hand brushed his and neither moved it away. Until one evening, the tension broke. She'd been reading in the library, rain pattering against the tall windows, when he appeared in the doorway. No words, just that look. Her book slipped shut. He crossed the room in slow, measured steps. A predator who knew the prey wasn't running. His hand came up to her jaw, tilting her face toward his, and this time, when his mouth claimed hers, there was no restraint. Everything that had been simmering, the glances, the silences, the questions poured into that kiss. His hands in her hair, hers gripping his shirt. The taste of wine and something darker. When they finally broke apart, breathless, his forehead rested against hers. The kiss didn't end. It deepened, slowed, then flared again, a tug-of-war between savoring and consuming. Daniel's hands slid to her waist, drawing her closer until there was no space left between them. She felt the solid, unyielding warmth of him through the thin layers of her clothes, the steady, deliberate press that told her he was done keeping his distance. Without breaking the kiss, he caught her hand in his and began to walk, unhurried, but with purpose. She let him lead her down the quiet hallway, Their footsteps, softened by the thick carpet, passed the closed doors of his immaculate penthouse until they reached the farthest wing. His room. It was larger than her entire apartment had been, all sharp lines and warm lighting, the floor-to-ceiling windows spilling in the city's glow. But she barely saw any of it because the moment the door clicked shut behind them, Daniel was there again. Close, relentless, his hands framing her face like she was something rare and breakable, though his kiss told a different story. The sweater slipped from her shoulders under his touch, the air cool for only a second before his warmth replaced it. His jacket landed somewhere behind them, his cufflinks glinting on the dresser where he discarded them without looking. He moved with the same precision he did in the boardroom. But here, it was tempered by something raw, something uncalculated. Her fingers threaded into his hair, feeling the low sound in his throat as he pulled her closer still. The fire in the corner cast gold across the room, catching the curve of his jaw, the intensity in his eyes. They found the bed without quite remembering how. His weight shifted the mattress as he eased her down, his touch a map of deliberate, lingering passes, memorizing her, not rushing a single moment. She felt the steady thrum of his heartbeat when he leaned over her, the faint brush of his breath against her ear when he whispered her name like it was both a promise and a claim.